I want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of equity when it comes to negotiating a tech offer. This is, in my opinion, the least understood component of tech, and it's also where you can often see the most movement when it comes to your total compensation. So the magic of Silicon Valley, the magic of tech, is that this idea of giving ownership to employees, that has really become way more popular with the advent of big tech and these tech companies that want to incentivize employees to come and work there. And there's a huge amount of value that has been created because employees will have even a fraction of a percent in some huge company that went public or got bought out for a bunch of money. So the key thing to realize is that companies are much more willing to give out equity relative to other components like base salary. And a big reason for this is that giving out equity is not reflected in the profit and loss statement, in the P&L. That means that companies are able to be a bit more flexible. Usually they'll have a much larger band of what they can give out for equity relative to salary. The other part of why you'll usually find more movement on the equity component is that equity as a whole is less understood by employees. And because it's less understood, fewer people ask about it, and then fewer people value it. And that means the upshot for you is that you are much more likely to get what you want if you truly understand it and what it could mean for you. A lot of companies in the Bay Area, which is where I am, they definitely use equity quite effectively, and people have an okay understanding of it. But when you leave this area, I think a lot of people completely ignore the value of what the stock they receive could actually mean for their finances and wealth creation. I have a friend who used to be a manager and tech lead at Uber, working in Amsterdam in Europe. And one thing he told me, which was really interesting, is that at Uber, they would have these employees who, in Europe especially, there's not as much awareness of the value of equity. Or I think outside of North America, I think there's probably not as much awareness. And so these employees who got offers at Uber, they were given meaningful stakes in the company. And Uber, as we all know, becomes a huge, huge company that if they had taken equity, they would have been multimillionaires many times over. But they were so focused on salary, which is the most well understood form of compensation, that they said, I just want $10,000 more salary. I don't even want any equity. That actually happened a couple times. And so the lack of equity knowledge outside of Silicon Valley, it can really hurt you. Let's revisit this chart from earlier about where does the compensation come from as you go from junior levels to senior levels in a technology company, especially in big tech. And what you can see is that equity becomes way more important the more senior you become. And so what that means is if you are so focused on salary, you're really shortchanging yourself by not optimizing what is going to be the majority of your net worth eventually. So here is my point of view. The best way to increase your TC is ask for more equity. Generally, what I have found is that, especially if you work at a tier 1 company, your salary can cover your living expenses. This is not true for everyone, obviously, but I'm speaking from my own experience and from talking to many people. Your salary is enough to cover your rent, your food, travel, and even potentially save some money. And that means that this equity that you get, whether it's stock options or your RSUs from the company, you're putting in a lot more risk, but you also get a lot more reward with that. There's a possibility for a 2x, a 5x, a 10x. And some people talk about this as like a lottery ticket. It's like, yeah, if you're joining a seed stage startup, then there's a good chance it'll go to zero, and there's a tiny chance it'll become huge. And that's actually fairly accurate. That's how I think you should think about very early stage companies that don't have too much funding or too much product market fit. But the magical thing about big tech is that you have these enormous companies that will almost certainly not go bankrupt or not really go down that much in the next 10 years, but they're still growing at astonishing rates. So just two examples that come to mind immediately are NVIDIA and Microsoft. In the past 10 years, these companies have gone up 5x, 10x, or more in value. And I would say that even 10 years ago, these were not risky companies to join. And if you look at where the majority of wealth is being created, There's way more people becoming millionaires or decamillionaires, like 10 million plus, at these big tech companies rather than having to go fight for a lottery ticket at some startup. So keep that in mind as you consider the job opportunities ahead of you. Equity is super important.